Hello. I wanted to provide an update on things I'm working on and plan to work on in the near future. This isn't necessarily because it's a new year, but it seems like the right time to do it. These are projects I've been working on for a while. So I've just got done having 2 sales for Trixie and Roy in the past month to what I would call success. Sold a number of copies, and I'm excited to see what readers think of it. I've already gotten some feedback from people who really enjoyed the book, which is awesome. But Trixie and Roy is a story I wrote over a year ago. I have other stories that I want to get out there, and I'm working at accomplishing that. So I thought it'd be helpful to explain what I'm working on to you guys, those of you who are interested in spending your time listening to this. But it'd also be useful to me as a writer. It's easy for writers to write and kind of keep things to themselves. We have an audience in mind, we have readers sort of as a goal out there to deliver the story to. I think that motivates some of us, or at least me. I don't know, I'm speaking for other people, but motivates me to put the book into print. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to finish a book's first draft, but all the things that lay between the first draft and delivering it to people to be read in a paperback, proofreading, editing, just various computer work, putting illustrations in, uploading it, setting prices, all that stuff is mind-numbingly boring to me. So I want to tell you guys about what I'm working on to intrigue you and to motivate myself through the drudgery of self-publishing. So currently I'm working on a story right now only known as the Fairy Folktale, or Fairy Folktale. It doesn't matter because that's just the working title. I usually name my books last, to be honest. I don't know how often I've started a book with the title just perfectly in mind, maybe once. Anyway, that's a story that you have seen many illustrations for in the past 6 months. A rabbit wearing a wolf skin, sort of cowboy-looking fellow with a crossbow-looking device, and an old man, and lots of animals wearing clothes, though that describes most of my drawings. And a dragon, a witch, all sorts of things. The idea for that is very simply a fairy tale structured story, fantasy sort of world with kings and dragons and knights. However, with this Western and also Southern sort of folklore veneer to it, so to speak. So instead of a fire-breathing dragon with wings, it's an alligator in a swamp. But not some ordinary alligator in the swamps of Florida. It's an alligator dragon. They call it a dragon. It's specific to this world. And it's monstrous and dangerous and evil, as any good dragon should be in a story. That book's coming along just fine. It's all a matter of time now. It's written. There are a few illustrations I've thought about adding to it, but most of those are done. They might need some groundwork, some details, but just got to put that all together. Then, after that, there's a book I wrote years ago. I'll tell you how long ago it was. It was in anticipation for the first Hobbit movie, which was, I don't know, back in 2012 or something like that. So I was very excited for that because I love the Lord of the Rings films and had complete faith in Peter Jackson's ability to make the Hobbit book into a wonderfully faithful film. And I was ultimately disappointed in that. But at the time, I was excited for the first film, following it closely, the production, development. And I reread The Hobbit and got all excited and wrote myself a fantasy book, somewhat in the vein of The Hobbit. I'd never try to copy other people's work. I think that's not writing, that's called plagiarism, but it was the basic idea of heroes journeying across the land to retake a lost homeland sort of thing. And it's not a big epic story, it's a very sort of episodic journey story with a long third act. So the story is called The Beast King. And I was rereading some of it last night, and I got excited all over again because it's nice 5 years later to read a book you wrote and to still like it. That's both nice but also rare, at least in my case. You find yourself only liking the maybe last 2 books you've written, but not the older ones. Just feel more like, oh, that was when I was a kid. That was good practice, but it's not a good story, you know. Anyway, The Beast King, I like it. I'm excited for it. I had a friend do illustrations for it years ago, and I want to get that out there. Realistically, both these books, by the end of February, I would wager. I think that's totally possible, and I plan to get that done. Another thing I like about The Beast King is it's not. So I'm an avid fantasy reader. That's not true. I've read many times only a few fantasy books. I like certain fantasy books that I've revisited again and again. I don't read the genre at large necessarily because I find a lot of it very derivative of J.R.R. Tolkien's writings or derivative of the things he was being derivative of, Norse mythology, elves, dwarves, all those things. You know, it's not like they can't be used in books anymore because Tolkien did it best, but the way they're used is pretty hacky and unoriginal and very, plainly put, uninteresting writing, and I'm not a fan of that. So The Beast King is obviously a fantasy book. It has some tropes, I'm sure, that are reminiscent of other fantasy stories. However, I like to think of it as a weird, different type of tale in certain respects. Some of the creatures they encounter, the peoples, the races, the character twists and development. I'm making it out to sound a lot more complex than it is. It's a very simple story, and I write pretty simple stories on purpose, but it's not a bunch of archetypes doing a bunch of archetypical things, and that's that. I'd like to think it has some personality to it and some refreshing, fantastical elements that are unlike other books. When writing The Beast King, I wasn't just excited about The Hobbit at the same time. I was reading a lot of Rudyard Kipling and I think some Lewis Carroll too. I was in a different mindset than simply swords and magic and dark woods and stuff. I also was in a mindset. I was reading other authors who tell I would say, The Jungle Book is a fantasy story. It's a fantastical story, but it's very different too. Kipling and Carroll and Tolkien all heavily influenced the writing of that book, and it was one of the easiest and most enjoyable books I've ever written. All that to say, these 2 books are coming out soon. I'm excited. They have drawings in them. I don't think I'll release them at the same time. I think that might sort of damage the ability for people to get one or the other, just be lost in the postings about books. It'd be a little too much all at once, so I'll probably space them out. The fairy folktale story is, again, for younger readers, 10 maybe onward, but just like Trixie and Roy, I don't write down to children. I don't dumb things down in a way that I'm writing for people who like words and language and like to learn new words and like to grow in their reading. So these are books that can be enjoyed by adults and children, which is proven at this point. A lot of families have read Trixie and Roy together, which is awesome. That's exactly what I had hoped. So be looking out for those. After that, I'd like to write, speaking of dumbing things down, I want to write a collection of short stories for younger audiences, for 5-year-olds and 5 to 10 maybe. I don't know. Even in writing for younger audiences, I intend to create stories that are fresh and interesting and fun and memorable, Who wants to be forgotten? Who wants to write things that are just like everything else? Memorable and exciting, just in terms of the language, it might be more Hemingway than Faulkner. And those will be heavily illustrated too. That book, I don't know what to call it, the short story collection, the fairy tales, they will be heavily illustrated be more of a true picture book, not just an illustrated novel. And I'm going to dabble into watercolor and try to provide some colorful depictions of the stories to go along with them. And not just pen and ink, but I'll also combine pen and ink with the watercolor. We'll see how easy that is for me, or if it just looks like garbage, I might chicken out, but we'll see. So the Book of Fairy Tales, the ideas are a tour, one story being about a tour of some tiny world, perhaps by a little creek. When I was a kid, I wrote a story called The Pond of Fairy, and it was all about the little critters that lived in this pond. And the only human who would kind of intrude on their world was a wayward boy skipping school, truant. But it was about frogs and bugs, and I think there were little elf people too. So that might make an appearance. That's hardly original, but I would definitely try to put my own voice into that kind of story. Another idea is just a pure animal story about animals in the woods. The Voyage of the Saltwater Gnomes, who of course appear in Trixie and Roy, and I'd just like to write a little story, kind of a day in the life of those guys. Then another idea for a story is about dreams, your dreams, explaining to children what their dreams mean, not in some sort of astrological or whatever field that is, but I don't know, I don't want to give too much away because I'm excited about that one. Then a tour of a star, which would of course be very unscientifically accurate and would be pure imagination and fantasy. Then a good old-fashioned hunting story, a band of heroes and hunters going after a legendary beast. It would be a comedic story, not one of murder in the woodland, but think more Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny than Bambi. The final story idea is about a group of children, siblings, fort in the woods, and how they share a fort in the woods and play among it, with a little more to it, but I don't want to say too much. Perhaps a few brief poems, verses in between stories, mix of pen and ink and watercolor, like I said. Each story, I want it to have its own flavor and feel, like I said, ages 5 to 10 roughly. Sort of a primer for my other written work. And they would not be incredibly long. As I said, they'll be more reliant on pictures. And I might want to print this as a hardback, too. It might just be better suited for that. I mean, I'd love to print all my books into hardcover, but it just gets very pricey, especially in the self-publishing world. So I want to make it as easy as I can on readers to acquire my books. That's the main goal, is to get you guys reading the stuff I write, though I do my best to make them look decent and legit and like something you'd be proud to have on your shelf for decades to come. So all that's coming up. Then after that, I'm excited for something else further down the road. When all that's out of the way and printed and published, I think it'll be easier on me, but not just easy. I am legitimately excited for this. It's hard to actually work on these things now when I think of this other project. I probably have ADD or something like that, but this other idea is to strictly depend on ebooks, or to strictly write ebooks going forward, but not in novels, not full-length stories. The idea is I want to keep, as a writer, I always want to be writing, whether it's stuff people read or not, but an idea I have is similar to what I've done with my website in the past, with the serial stories about the quirky little town of Hickory with the sort of sci-fi elements, but this would be sort of a throwback to Pulp Fiction, not the movie, but sort of these old, simple books that were just plainly written and plot-driven and a lot of action. They were kind of these over-the-top adventures. So I hope to establish some characters, probably set in the early 1900s, somewhat set in our real world, but I'm not going to rely too much on being historically accurate. The idea is to write just quick, punchy stories, adventure stories, action stories. These will be less appropriate for younger readers. I never plan to write crass body stories, but these will most likely have stronger language and more violent themes and things of that nature. But the idea is that they'd be short, maybe 20,000 words a piece, almost just like long short stories, not quite novellas. I'm not sure of the technical metric for that, but these will be nice, pithy, plot-driven, exciting, page-turning ebooks that I can... Theoretically, I'll be able to write these faster, put them out faster. I won't get slowed down by the other aspects of self-publishing and printing. And of course, one day I'll return to that. Like I said, I prefer print books. I prefer physical copies of stories to hold and carry around with you, but there is a nice convenience of ebooks, and a lot of people use them, and e-readers. And as a writer, it's the most convenient of all is to just be able to write a story, really proofread it probably once, and then post it. These aren't going to be, like I said, these aren't going to be things I'm pouring my heart and soul into and trying to create great works of literature. That said, I hope they'll be... I'm never going to just write schlock. I'm never going to... Because I can't even do that as a writer, as a person. I don't enjoy that. If I start writing something that I feel is just uninteresting and already been told 100,000 times, and I usually quit. That is what's on the ledger, and I appreciate those of you who've tuned in for this. This is sort of an experiment to see if this would be fun to do. I'm always trying to think of different ways to interact with you guys that's not repetitive and sort of spammy with posts of read my book or whatever, I try to create drawings and write stories that I truly honestly think people would enjoy. I'm not doing this just to get attention. I'm doing it because I love it, and Instagram has been a surprisingly helpful outlet for that, a way to meet wonderful people and exchange art and ideas and stories, etc. And I'll continue to post drawings and attempts at watercolor and the occasional poem as well. But in terms of writing is what I do the most. It's what I care the most about. Drawing was always sort of a side interest and hobby, and I enjoy it a lot, and I'm glad I've worked so hard at it the past couple years and have gotten a lot better than I used to be by taking it more seriously. But again, writing is always my first love and my first goal here. So if it ever feels like I'm bothering you to read my latest story, it's not because I'm trying to make a quick buck. It's genuinely because I think I've written something that people would like to read and would enjoy reading and would be happy that they read it. So that's always the goal, and that's always the aim, is to create imaginative artwork and tales to be enjoyed, simply put. So thank you again. I might do another one of these at some point, talking about other things of interest to myself, but or I might not, so you never know. We'll see. Thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful day, and good luck to all your projects and all the things you're pursuing right now as well.